everybody. Welcome to the 2026 National Convention of the CPI Center for Political Innovation. First, I want to give a thank you to the Colectivo Ecuatoriano Patria Grande for owning this beautiful space that we're using right here. I hope everyone has had coffee, bagels, everyone's comfortable, everyone's having a good time. My name is Michael Martinez. I'm from Miami. I'm Cuban American, born in Miami. But unlike most Cuban Americans from Miami, when I was a young teen, I joined the movement for socialism in 1997. In the early 2000s, I started working with the Antonio Macel Brigade and the Miami Coalition to end the U.S. embargo of Cuba. And directly after that, I don't know if a lot of people remember, but in Venezuela, there was something big that happened. It was the Bolivarian Revolution, started by Hugo Chavez. In 2003, I founded the Bolivarian Circle of Miami along with a lot of other comrades. And in 2005, I started the Bolivarian Youth, which took 11 delegates from Miami to the World Youth Festival in Caracas, Venezuela, the 16th World Youth Festival, where there was over 700 U.S. delegates, and there was delegates from people all around the world. And I've been supporting and in solidarity with the progressive movement in Latin America ever since and all around the world. I met Caleb in 2007 at the U.S. Social Forum in Atlanta, Georgia, where we worked together on a forum on the legacy of Che Guevara. Immediately, I knew that I saw a comrade in Caleb. Even though he was much younger than me, he was such a bright person. Ever since, we've become friends and comrades, where we were both in the same youth organization called FIST, Fight Imperialism, Stand Together. So we've been fighting imperialism for a long time. Not only that, in 2010, Caleb attended a walkout in Collinwood High School where his video recording of a police brutality incident ended up in a young black woman being acquitted of falsely assaulting a police officer. From 2011 to 2015, Caleb was a media spokesperson for former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, who a lot of you may remember. He's done a lot of important work in the United States. And from all of this, finally in 2020, Caleb founded the Center for Political Innovation. And I have come around, which I have now joined, and I'm proud to be a member of the Center for Political Innovation. I just want to talk a little bit about the situation in my home country in Cuba, which is right now is suffering a oil blockade and the worst sanctions, the harshest sanctions in the known history of humanity. And the situation is so dire. There's power outages almost 22 hours a day, where people don't have access, their food and since they don't have any power, they can't keep food in the refrigerator. There's no air conditioning, and the biggest problem with this is hospitals, schools. There's children people on dialysis, elderly. When these sanctions kill people. Yeah. These sanctions are genocidal. And while people are coming in solidarity with Cuba to try to stop the genocide, the same way while we're coming in solidarity with the people of Gaza, who are also facing a horrible genocide, the United States is trying to stamp out the solidarity movement. And just recently, the Cuba solidarity movement was targeted by the FBI. But I'm proud to say that CPI is not afraid, and we're going to keep continuing, and we'll never stop our solidarity, neither with the people of Cuba, the people of Venezuela, the people of Palestine, all people around the world. So these gatherings are important. CPI celebrated Comandante Fidel Castro's birthday just a couple days ago, which may seem just like a small forum, but for the people of Cuba who are suffering the embattlement of these sanctions, to them it's a morale boost to know that they have friends within the belly of the beast. Well, I'm not going to go on because I just wanted to introduce Caleb, but such a brilliant leader. I've known Caleb, like I said, since 2007, and since the very first day I've been impressed by this man. So I am happy to be working under his leadership, and as you can see how knowledgeable he is, all of these books. Look how many books were written by Caleb on so many subjects. I mean, a more well-read comrade I haven't met yet. I haven't met yet. So I tell all people, the best work, come and do the best work. Be effective. Not just a web-evolutionary online, but on the streets, yes, where it matters. Join the CPI so you won't just talk the talk, but you'll walk the walk with us. And we're reaching not just the bitter, disenfranchised people from different oppressed communities, but we're reaching the entire working class. And that's important because we need unity. We need everyone's unity in order to affect real change. That's right. And that's what we're doing with CPI. So I don't want to keep taking up more space. I want to introduce to you our leader, our co-chair, or president, Caleb Maupin.
I think we should all take this opportunity to stretch a little bit, stand up, stretch out. We can find security in the passage of time. Today is Saturday, and I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but every Saturday in my entire life has been followed by a Sunday, and every Sunday in my entire life has been followed by a Monday, and every Monday in my life, believe it or not, has been followed by a Tuesday. And every Tuesday in my life, believe it or not, has been followed by a Wednesday. And I don't know what tomorrow will be like, but I can guarantee you it will be unlike any other Sunday that has ever existed before and ever happened before. And this is the kind of thing that humans do that brings us security. Since the beginning of time, human beings have been trying their hardest to make sense of a very insecure world, a world full of chaos and unpredictability and tension and frightening things. We've been trying to find security in the patterns that exist. So you think about ancient human beings who looked up at the stars, made up stories about the different constellations. Think about the way they track the seasons. This is something that human beings do in order to find security. We find security in patterns and trying to predict what's happening next and trying to make sense of the world as it is. This is the human experience. It's a battle that we're all waging. How can we find security in times with so much insecurity? How can we find peace in a world with so much chaos? How can we know that we're safe? This is the human experience. going back thousands and thousands of years, to the time people were living in caves all the way right up to now. And we at the Center for Political Innovation, our message, if it really got down to anything, was that human beings can change the world, and have changed the world, and are the only species that has really ever changed the world. Other species simply interact with their environment, but mankind forces the environment to serve him, and by doing so masters the environment and reinvents it. And that's something you can find in the book of Genesis. That's something you can find in the writings of Friedrich Engels and Marx. Human beings are the species that reinvents and changes the world around them. And that is what defines humanity. And no other species can do what human beings can do. And we live in a society that does everything it can to disempower people, to make people feel like they don't have the ability to change things, to reduce people to what we call living biologically. A plant in your garden is alive, but it's not really changing the world. It's not fighting and asking big questions. A plant is just alive, technically, in the biological sense, but it's not really alive. And a mouse, a rat, it's alive, but it's not asking big questions. It's not changing the world around it. It just kind of exists. It's living only in the biological sense. But what we seek to do with the Center for Political Innovation is to challenge people to transcend merely a biological existence and to take on a truly human existence. And we have found a huge amount of inspiration in the writings of Wallace Wattles. I got to tell you, was a CPI member 3 years ago who told me about this great socialist Christian who lived in 1900, 1910, around that time, and wrote a lot of self-help books. Way a long time ago, a good friend of Eugene Debs. I have found his work to be so inspiring. And so we'll start out with a passage from Wallace Wattles. He says, "There are two attitudes a man may take. One makes him like a football. It has resilience. It reacts strongly when force is applied to it, but it originates nothing. There is no power within it. Men of this type are controlled by their circumstances and by their environment. Their destinies are decided by things external to themselves. But the other attitude makes man like a flowing spring. Power comes out from the center of him. He has within him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. He radiates force. He is felt by his environment. The principle of power within him is in constant action. He is self-active. He hath life within himself." That's Wallace Wattles talking about what it means to take on a truly human existence, what it means to find the power within yourself to change the world. That's Wallace Wattles' words. And I'm going to go over everything we've done this year because we are an active organization. I liked how Mike put it. He said we're not what does he say? Wevolutionaries. We're revolutionaries, right? We're telling people that you can actually do something. You don't have to just doom scroll and read about how bad the world is and tear down somebody else online. You can actually step outside and not only touch grass, but take up a sign or take up a bullhorn and challenge people and challenge the world. So I'm going to go over here the list of things that we have done so far in the year of 2026. And keep in mind, it's only August. I know there's people here in the audience who might want to chime in and talk about some of what they've done. So, if you want to shout out a couple things or whatever. On the 3rd of January, the day that Nicolás Maduro was kidnapped from Venezuela, within hours of the kidnapping, CPI members were in the streets condemning it. Gavin was in the streets of Davenport, Iowa.
They want the U.S. to stay out of it.
We need to be America first, not take sides in Venezuela's conflict. Let them sort out that conflict. It's none of our business.
Penny was in the streets of Minneapolis standing against it.
Hands up, Venezuela! Hands up, Maduro! Hands up, Venezuela! Hands up, Maduro!
We had members in New York City who were in the streets. Just hours after Nicolás Maduro was kidnapped, CPI was out there condemning this illegal action by the United States. And then, on the 10th of January, we were all gathered, kind of like we are here for our New Jersey event, and we felt like if we're all so close to the jail where Maduro is being held, we got to do something about it. So we piled into a 15-passenger van, and we drove to downtown Brooklyn, and we had a Free Maduro rally. outside the jail. And Mike was there, and Penny was there, and Gavin was there, and
Mike ran past
Penny and Mike,
the guards.
right, they ran up to the guards, and it made them nervous outside the jail, and we chanted, "Free Maduro now! Free Maduro now! Free Maduro now! Free Maduro now!" It was epic. We were there outside the jail with signs, with a megaphone. Yeah, Dan spoke very beautifully, gave a very epic speech from the back door of the jail. Yeah.
There was a Hispanic man that came to join us, and so he and Gabby were speaking Spanish to the audience.
Somebody in the window above that was opened their window, must have been one of the detainees, maybe ICE detainees, that was watching what we were doing.
Yeah, and yeah, there were a bunch of people just kind of hanging around outside the jail, like live streaming, who were very sympathetic, you know, and it was really beautiful. That video was really, really epic of us outside the jail, the Brooklyn Metropolitan Detention Center where Maduro is being held. The next day, we then had our New Jersey event that we'd all gathered in New Jersey for, our New Year's event called Earth is Awakening, America Should Join. And at that event, we presented an award to Lisa Davis, a leader of the Black is Back Coalition. We presented an award to Christina Khalil, a pro-Palestine Egyptian-American candidate for the Green Party who ran for the U.S. Senate. She was really honored to receive recognition. We also honored Jessica Coco for her lifelong work as an anti-imperialist. So we're really glad you're here, Jessica. And you gave a great presentation about going to Belarus and the confusion of the left and all of your experiences. That was really, really great. The end of January and at the beginning of February, I was in Minneapolis for a couple weeks because there was a lot of unrest. And I got to spend a lot of time with Penny, and we had some reading groups and all of that. We had a lot of dialogue with people about getting beyond the red team versus blue team situation in Minneapolis. It was quite a tense situation out there.
Even the Uber driver said he couldn't drive his black van anymore because the anti-ICE people would chase him down. They tried to get into your cameraman's van.
Yeah, it was insane. On the 23rd of February, we co-signed a letter to the United Nations Human Rights Council and to the UN Secretary General. It was a letter from the Islamic Human Rights Commission of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it was signed by a number of intellectuals around the world, members of parliament from all over the world, the leaders of nonprofits and foundations from all over the world. Some very prominent names signed on to it, like Norman Finkelstein and others. And we were listed, the Center for Political Innovation, listed in this letter condemning the idea of the USA attacking Iran. And that was very important that we did that. The day before that, February 22nd, our members went out in the snow in Times Square in New York City, and we joined Manhattan Family Church to rally in support of Dr. Haq Jahan, a pro-peace activist, a voice for peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, who's being prosecuted right now in South Korea. And we were out there in Times Square in the snow with a crowd of people, and we said, "Please release the Mother of Peace. Please release the Mother of Peace. Please release the Mother of Peace." February 28th, we called a national day of action for no war against Iran because we saw that it was coming. And that ended up being the day that the USA murdered the supreme leader of Iran and launched their completely unprovoked, unjustified, completely illegal attack against Iran. And while that war was breaking out, we had members in 8 cities across the country in the streets. In New York, in Minneapolis, Chicago, Portland, Los Angeles, Joshua Tree, California, Iowa, and St. Louis, Missouri. We had people out in the streets with CPI banners opposing this illegal war and this illegal attack. On the 4th of March, I was invited onto an Iranian TV program to represent the anti-war majority in America. And I spoke to the Iranian audiences, making clear that the American people do not support this war, that polls show 75 to 80% of Americans did not agree with Trump's unjustified, completely illegal move to attack Iran. And it was really an honor to come on Iranian TV and be on there for a while, representing the true side of America as our government was doing criminal and horrific things. We know about the bombing of the elementary school in Manab and all the awful things there. The 15th of March is the Ides of March. And so in Minneapolis and in Los Angeles, we had City Builders Day house parties to tell the story of the assassination of Julius Caesar. And that's a lot of, CPI in our narrative, our understanding of empires and imperialism. And we told the story of the assassination of Julius Caesar. We talked about imperialism. In Minneapolis, you had a great house party. And
Did you play the guitar?
very good. He's good at that. And they did it also at the California University, right?
We were outside in University Village, adjacent to USC, and we had Tim read from the City Builders book, because that was our book club book at the time, and there's a section in there about the Ides of March and Julius Caesar, and he read that as students were going by.
So then, March 28th, That was a day I will never forget. That was a wild day, and I'm sure Paul will never forget it, Noah will never forget it, Phil will never forget it, Jessica will never forget it. March 28th, the Democrats called one of their silly No Kings rallies. You remember that? And even though public opinion was so overwhelmingly opposed to attacking Iran, their No Kings parade was sponsored by a lot of wealthy Zionists. And so they didn't include condemning attacking Iran in their call. So we assembled. Noah came down from Boston. Jessica came in from New Jersey. Gabby came in all the way from Chicago. And what did we do? We blocked the parade. We assembled along Fifth Avenue, and we had that placard there, and we had signs and Iranian flags and American flags, and we blocked the No Kings parade. And we chanted, what did we chant? Democrats can stop the war, hands off Iran. Democrats can stop the war, hands off Iran. Democrats can stop the war, hands off Iran. And what was amazing was that the marshals tried to move us. We wouldn't move. We were blocking the march. They eventually had to call the NYPD to clear us out. But even though we were blocking their parade, the overwhelming majority of the people that were participating in the No Kings parade agreed with us and supported us and were giving us high fives and thumbs up because they're against this war. And that gives me the hope that we can get past this silly red team versus blue team politics that is keeping us behind a broken political establishment. So then, the following day, Noah and Gabby were still in town, so we kicked off our outreach campaign around a special pamphlet we had. Does someone want to hold it up? The Kim Il-sungya pamphlet. All right, so this is a pamphlet that we published. It's called Why Is It Impossible to Get This Flower in America? Well, that flower is Kim Il-sungya. It is the flower from Indonesia that was named after Kim Il-sung, the founder of People's Korea. It was named after him by Sukarno, the anti-imperialist leader in Indonesia, just months before he was killed in the US-backed coup. And it is now a national symbol of North Korea. And so we wrote this pamphlet as kind of an introduction to anti-imperialism called Why Can't You Get This Flower in America? And what does it say? Does someone want to read the back, what it says on the back?
Someday this flower will grow in the White House Rose Garden and the halls of Congress.
And that's true. That is the truth. And we use this pamphlet, we've distributed thousands of them across America, to educate people about anti-imperialism and start a conversation. It's a conversation starter. So the day after we blocked the No Kings parade, Noah and Gabby went to the historic Riverside Church, where they have a very big morning services, and they stood outside of Riverside Church and handed out Kim Il-sungya pamphlets. It was the beginning of our flower campaign that we launched.
Yeah, that day we did it there, and then we also went to Columbia Circle afterwards, and I remember I was talking to a young man. He was of Chinese descent about the book, and he was somewhat interested or whatever. And then this young woman ran from across the park because she overheard our conversation. Was like, "Excuse me, I'm really interested in this," because she looked like she was of Southeast Asian descent, and you don't often hear people talking about the history of Indonesia and their friendship with the Korean people. So.
The reaction we've gotten, people are inspired when they get this pamphlet. Why can't you get this flower in America? And let's also add that whenever they show North Korea on TV, what do they show whenever they show North Korea? If they say North Korea on CNN, I count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then they have guys going, right? North Korea is just a 24/7 military parade. Well, if we're showing people a flower, a beautiful flower, that's showing another side. It's showing that the people there are human. That's what it's showing. These are people with dreams and aspirations just like us, and that there could be potential for peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula and win-win cooperation and trade. It's the kind of optimistic message that is kind of the trademark of our organization. We're not here to preach resentment and negativity. We're here to give people hope. March 31st, the last day of March, we participated in the United Nations Women's History Month closing ceremony, which was a really big honor, and many leaders of nonprofits and NGOs from around the world were there. The World Yoga Council was represented, different organizations were represented there, and I gave a message on behalf of the Center for Political Innovation to this United Nations event. I highlighted the crimes of Japanese imperialism against women on the Korean Peninsula and throughout the Pacific during the Second World War, the comfort women atrocities. And it was quite an event. Gabby was there, Noah was there. At the event, I was named an official peace ambassador by the Universal Peace Federation, so that was a real honor. In the month of April, in both Los Angeles and Minneapolis, we decided to counter the Falun Gong and their song and dance extravaganza called China Before Communism. And the slogan that the LA folks and the Minneapolis folks went out with was, China before communism was feudalism. Yes, and we had stuff about foot binding, and we had stuff about the impoverishment of the peasantry and how China has raised so many people out of poverty, and that narrative that oh, everything was great and grand in China before the communists came along. It's actually kind of the opposite. It's the communists that built modern China and made it a strong and powerful country. And so we countered the fallen gong in their message.
They have female odd astronauts in leadership.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. The fact that they can have this show all across America called China Before Communism, and no one thinks, like, what was the life expectancy before communism? What is it now? You know, what was the rate of electrification? I mean, it's, you know, the levels of improvement that the Communist Party has brought to China should be very, very obvious.
There was a security guard that came up to us, and we were not trying to interfere with people going and coming from the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in downtown LA. And the security guard came up to us and said, I don't know if you're supposed to be doing this. Let's go check with my boss. You know, so he goes and he takes us literally closer, right up to the front door. So even more people get to see the sign, and then he never comes back.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Maybe that was intentional.
Well,
Could be.
So then on the 21st, we had to speak up for our friend Dr. Ranjit Brar in Britain. A friend of ours, his sister has spoken at CPI conferences before. His sister Jyoti Brar is the leader of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. He's also a prominent leader of that organization. And he gave a speech supporting Iran and supporting the Palestinians. And he was...
Victory to Iran!
Yes, that was what he said. He shouted, "Victory to Iran." And
Victory to Iran. I don't know why you wouldn't say it. Victory to Iran. They are rewriting the map of the Middle East. They are ejecting the US imperialists from the whole region. I can't agree more with the last speaker who said this is the end of Sykes-Picot. I thought it at the beginning of the Palestinian uprising we would see a wider war. At the end of the 8-day war, I was one of those people who wanted Iranian not to stop striking Israel. Why should we be afraid to say it? Israel, its genocidal settler colonial entity, has no right to existence. It needs to be wiped off the face of the map and replaced with the word Palestine in its entirety. I want to see the Lebanese resistance triumph. I want to see the Yemeni resistance triumph. I want to see the fall of the imperialist stooge regimes.
so they arrested him, and they took him from his home. This guy's a surgeon. They took him from his home for his speech and arrested him. So Penny went out in the streets in Minneapolis, and Gary too. They were out there educating people about Dr. Ranjit Brar and talking to people and leafleting about the arrest for a speech of our friend in Britain. And that was really, really important that they did that, because free speech is becoming more and more of an issue, which we're going to get into plenty today. So then, on the 15th of April, I was invited to attend an important conference in Moscow, and that was the founding of the International Association for Political and Electoral Expertise. So basically, whenever they have elections around the world, there are these elections monitoring organizations that work for the Pentagon and work for NATO and Wall Street, and they go and they put their narrative out on the country. And if they don't like the country's elections, they don't like who won, they find irregularities, and if they like the country, well, even if there are problems like there have been in many South American elections lately, this new association has been founded in Moscow with people from all over the world to counter and serve as an alternative to the biased Western electoral observation organizations. And the Center for Political Innovation was a founding participant in that association. And then I had to get on a plane and come back from Moscow, and the next day I had to go right back to the airport because I had to go to St. Louis to speak at the plenary of the African People's Socialist Party in St. Louis, Missouri, where the Uhuru Three, Chairman O'Malley, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville, who've been fighting the FBI in federal court, charged with being Russian agents, etc., they had their national gathering of their organization, and they rolled out the red carpet for me. They gave me 2 opportunities to speak. The chairman thanked CPI very profusely for all that we have done.
And I want to mention Caleb Maupin from CPI. And, I'm just so pleased and proud of this relationship with this comrade, because there are people who told us that we shouldn't work with Caleb and CPI. I don't know how the hell you're going to say that. I mean, when this attack came, CPI, first on the front lines fighting back against the attack that was on us. First out of the gate. And then I saw Comrade Caleb a video where he was in Russia. and it might have been some youth thing, I'm not sure. But President Putin, Vladimir Putin, was on the platform speaking, and I saw Caleb stand up and ask the president about the Uhuru 3. And he said, I want to tell you about this case in the United States where we've been attacked because they accuse us of working for the Russians. I mean, these comrades have just been on the case, just remarkable. I've seen members of the CPI dragged out of public forums. That's where there are all of these big shot editors of major so-called legacy media, and I've seen them get dragged out because they didn't mention the Uhuru 3. They didn't mention the attack on the Uhuru house. So that's my comrade. That's my comrade. And so the people who said that, some comrades who said they'll not work with us because we were working, this is the white left. I call it the white left behind. But these are comrades who said they won't work with us because we work with Caleb. And we said, bye. So I just wanted to acknowledge this comrade. And I really, really worked hard. I really pursued everything we could to make sure that he tried to get here to this plenary. And he had us at a convention that they had not too long ago in Chicago.
Uhuru. I sometimes will be up late at night. I might get off of a flight and I'll see that there's a live stream from CPI, so I'll log in. I think it was last week, and I was just about to fall asleep. It was like a late night talk, and then I woke up because Caleb says, you know, the word Uhuru, and he starts talking about this plenary here. And then he pulls up a book, and I think I made a comment earlier, and then I see he posted it, and I was like, right on, comrade, right on. And he says to everybody in the chat, he's like, you need to be there. Yeah. Uhuru.
We raised the case directly with Russian President Putin at the World Youth Festival. We sponsored a United Nations press conference, and the words that Chairman O'Malley and the Uhuru movement gave to us, the reason that I was there to be honored. We have done so much around that case because we understand how important it is. We really should be humble. We don't deserve that huge amount of praise because everyone else should have been doing the same thing. Everyone who's concerned about free speech should have been speaking up for the Uhuru movement. And we set the example, and we spoke up for the Uhuru movement, and we're speaking up for the Cuba folks now. It's not a matter of agreeing with people. It's not a matter of liking people. It's a matter of should we be able to get up and say anti-imperialist things or not. And go ahead, John.
Chairman included the panel we did on their case at our last convention a year ago in his political report for that plenary.
Yeah, we honored them last year here in Chicago. We gave an award to a leader of their organization. John has done more than anybody to be our liaison, to connect us with the Uhuru movement. Thank you for all your hard work, John. You have worked very, very hard to stand with them, and you're an inspiration to all of us. You really stepped up. We had a conference here in Chicago in 2022. And it was weeks after the raid on the Uhuru house. And we invited them just weeks afterwards. And we welcomed them and said, stand with them against the FBI raids. And John, that was the first CPI thing he'd ever been to in person. And he was moved, and he said, I'm going to be the liaison. I'm going to work with the Uhuru movement and CPI. And ever since then, John has functioned as our liaison. And our relationship with the Uhuru movement, they got a video message we're going to be showing later tonight in the evening session where Matt Weinglass is going to be speaking as well. That relationship that we have with Chairman O'Malley and the Uhuru movement is really important. And John is responsible for that relationship. So thank you, John. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The Los Angeles Festival of Books happened on April 18th, and the LA team, which we've got quite a team out there. Dan has really organized the people. They go out there all the time. Dan and Tim and Steven, and there's a whole crew of people I'm not mentioning who couldn't make it. Ishmael's a really loyal, dedicated guy, and they went to the LA Festival of Books, talked to people, handed out leaflets, engaged with people about anti-imperialism. It's really important to be represented at the LA Times Festival of Books. And
we should more and more,
yeah.
Mr. Caleb.
One of these years we're going to have a booth there, a CPI booth of our own, on May 1st, Penny went to the University of Minnesota with the Kim Il-sungya booklet, and she spent hours out there handing out the Kim Il-sungya flower booklet and engaging with students. That was really, really great.
We had a lot of positive engagement, even with people that aren't politically aligned with us. Everyone, especially college students, understand that this economic system is working against them. So it was great. Even religious people were interested because we do have a spiritual aspect of our organization.
She caught some of those exchanges on video. It's just really, really beautiful. We're going out there and engaging with people. This is not the huge glamorous work. This isn't running and getting on CNN, but just being there and having those one-on-one conversations is so, so important. Outreach, outreach, outreach. That's what we're all about. We want to reach people who would never go looking for this. We don't want to reach people who this is part of their internet niche. We want to reach people who would never in a million years go looking for this, and we want to challenge them to think. The New York City Center for Political Innovation, on the 2nd of May, we decided we needed to have an event for Victory Day, but we decided to theme it around the fact that a new film version of George Orwell's Animal Farm had just been released with Seth Rogen. So we protested outside the movie theater in Times Square. We had big signs with Orwell, go to hell, and challenging Orwell's narrative. And then we had an educational forum. It was actually Noah's idea to counter the George Orwell film, and Noah gave a great presentation kind of debunking George Orwell and the narrative, the pessimistic narrative that he puts out there that kind of seems edgy because it's kind of vaguely critical of the establishment, but it leads to a negative place. And that you can watch the videos of that educational forum we did about Animal Farm, about George Orwell, the demonstration. And also the demonstration, there were like 2 or 3 people that were just walking by who came to the demonstration and were amused, and then came to the dinner and banquet with speeches afterwards. So there were 2 or 3 people that just kind of came along, and that was pretty neat as well.
Los Angeles, we were
Yes.
out on Lancashire Boulevard in front of the entrance to Universal Studios, and then we took a tram up into the actual park area and went and we're outside the theater there where they were showing the Animal Farm. It was a re-release.
On the 5th of May, we launched the American Juche Study Group. And once a week, every Tuesday evening, Noah has been leading online sessions, and we actually published this book, Juche for American Workers, the ideology of the Korean Revolution. And once a week, we've done 14 sessions studying the ideology of Kim Il-sung and the Korean Revolution, which really is a very important thing, right? If you read North Korean state media, they talk about Juche study groups around the world. So the fact that we launched one and we've been doing it week after week after week and had people, and the streams are open, anyone can join, talking about Kim Il-sung and North Korea, and it's important stuff, reading Kim Il-sung's works. On the 12th, Tim was among our members in Los Angeles, June 12th, who went outside the World Cup match. Switzerland and Argentina were playing a game in LA, and Tim and the Hands Off Cuba Committee of LA had a spirited demonstration to raise solidarity with Cuba outside the LA Cup match, right? Yeah? That was great. On the 27th of June, Penny, myself, and Noah all appeared on a 2-hour TV panel that was broadcast on Pan-African TV in Cameroon on a TV program called Global Insights, and we were joined by academics. They gave CPI the floor, 3 of our members, and for 2 hours we were on there talking about the work that we've done, largely the work that we've done to promote Ibrahim Traoré, the great African leader. He's a really important figure, and we have been out in the front saying that he's the example of the kind of leader that we need. Hands off Traoré!
Hands off Traoré! Hands off Traoré! Hands off Traoré!
Then something interesting happened on June 30th. We don't even call ourselves communists, right? I'll just be clear. We started out with that label, but it became clear that we're doing something new and unique. We're celebrating human creativity. If you talk about communism in America, it immediately turns into a conversation about making everyone equal. And that's not what we're trying to do. We want to rationally organize the economy to unleash human creativity, to reach a state of abundance. We can organize the banks, factories, and industries to serve the people and have a state that invests in people and their creative power. We can do that. But if you talk about communism, people think, well, that means taxes on people to make everyone equal or something. So we don't even call ourselves communists. Are we left? Are we right? Well, we're neither. We're innovationists. And we can speak to things that people on the right are concerned about and that people on the left are concerned about. But something interesting happened on June 30th, which is I got an invitation to go on a podcast called Revolutionary Change. Peter Hager and Jen Perlman are some podcasters in Florida. I think Jen Perlman has run for office as a DSA kind of candidate. They're kind of a leftist podcast. And they invited us on, and we talked about Trotsky and the neoconservatives, and we talked about innovationism, we talked about the whole thing. But I was the second guest, and you know who the first guest was before they had me on? Dr. Cornel West, a prominent theologian. And I thought, wow, what is going on here? I thought the left hated me, and they're having me on podcasts with Cornel West. This is interesting. They seem to like us, and they did a show just 2 days ago to promote this convention. So, you know, it's interesting, the relationships that we're building. The thing is, we'll work with anybody who will work with us around opposing imperialism, left, right, center, or whatnot. And also, it's important to note that Really American Podcast promoted our LA branch. They didn't only just have Dan on, they let Dan go over the 4-point program. They interviewed him extensively about CPI. They did this kind of video that he's going to show later where it was like kind of like a satire thing about a crusade. And then at the end, they just brought Dan on. He was at the protest. They brought him on to talk about our 4-point plan, to talk about innovationism.
No war with Iran. Right. You don't agree with the Holy War?
The Holy War, based on you talking about Islam versus what?
Well, what I'm referring to is the justification that's being used by a lot of top military officials who are saying things like this war is God's plan to bring on Armageddon, the second coming of Christ, and it's their moral justification for why we are at war with Iran. You don't support that?
No, I mean, that sounds like mental illness to me.
Why don't you see this holy righteousness as adequate moral cause to invade a foreign country and murder people and do regime change in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, you know, I'm a preacher's kid, and I was raised that you love your neighbor as yourself.
Well, I think that's how the Bible says it, but I don't know if that's what they mean. What do you think is the actual root cause of this war? Why do you think they're doing this?
Well, I think their ultimate goal is to control the world. I mean, again, and try to find a way to base it on Holy Scripture. But these people think that it doesn't matter if people die. I mean, they don't care if children die. I mean, look at Epstein. Yeah. They don't care what happens to children. This is the same thing in Palestine. We bombed a school, or we bombed a hospital. Oh, well.
I was surprised to find myself agreeing with these people. Their radical left-wing ideology of focusing on domestic issues and strengthening community was starting to sound not so radical.
Things are horrible now in the U.S. You know, I'm not denying that. But the thing that I've always had an issue with, even with people in media, is that if you're going to identify the problems, that's great. But you need solutions like mass mobilization to rebuild the country.
Like a manifesto.
Public ownership of natural resources, or public control of central banking instead of private banks for profit, and an economic bill of rights like FDR proposed in 1944. Those are real solutions that can be implemented with a government of action for working families.
And if there are any insane heathens that are watching this video and agree with you, where could they find more information about such an organization?
No, I hope they wouldn't be insane, the heathens. But it's CPI. USA.org. It stands for the Center for Political Innovation. Okay, we also have a YouTube channel as well, Center for Political Innovation. You can find morning messages there. I tend to post inspirational or educational or political things there. Yeah. And you can see the whole vibe and see what we're all about.
And they just kind of gave us the floor on this YouTube channel that has 1 million subscribers and all of that. Again, we'll work with anybody. If you want to stop the wars, if you want to fight for working families, we'll work with you. We're not playing the left-right game, so left-right, if you want to work with us, we'll work with you. That's our attitude. Somali Independence Day was July 1st. Oh, yeah. And our members out in Minneapolis went out to talk about Ibrahim Traoré at Somali Independence Day. And they got a great response. You know, many people of Somali descent are inspired by Ibrahim Traoré and what he's doing. And that they were out there, Gary and Penny were out there with the Ibrahim Traoré banner and talking to people and engaging with people. It went very well, very well. That was on Somali Independence Day.
Gary, tell them how we found out about it.
Oh, yeah, we did a thing for Juneteenth, and we had our signs out there for Juneteenth. The guy came by, he knew all about Juneteenth. He wanted to have his spot on the camera, so we gave it to him. He told us all about Juneteenth, and he goes, you guys should come to the Somali Independence Festival. So it's always great to interview people and let them be part of what we're doing.
This effort to popularize Ibrahim Traoré, this is really important because we're not talking about a leader who's bad. We're not talking about a leader we hate. We're talking about a leader we like. And we're showing that in this impoverished African country of Burkina Faso, that's part of the Union of Sahel States, when they have a government that invests in people and opposes the imperialists, they can do so much. And so imagine what we could do here in the wealthiest country in the world. If he can raise his people up and have a farming explosion, it's really, really amazing. So this Ibrahim Traoré popularization campaign, Penny's got a new book that everyone got a copy of when they came called AES Effect, and we have been doing everything we can to highlight the positive and promote Ibrahim Traoré and the Union of Sahel States, the Alliance of Sahel States. July 4th, we had protests in Times Square in New York City and in Los Angeles, and our theme was finish the American Revolution, end the British Empire system and its wars. This literal placard was being held in Times Square, and we had bullhorns, and they were out in the streets of LA. And
we were actually in a smaller community. There were still thousands of people there, but that's the thing about Los Angeles. We have so many communities. We can even do smaller community events where there's still thousands of people.
In Times Square in New York City, there was like a military recruiting event happening around the same place, and they were all giving us thumbs up. And they were all posing for pictures next to the sign. We have veterans on there, we won't fight another rich man war. And uniformed military guys that are doing recruitment are saying, I agree, and taking selfies. That's amazing. That shows where the politics are at, the potential of our times. I guess I'll just add, we all gathered here for our 7-day program and our national convention. And of course, we're not just going to let that time pass. So yesterday was a very busy day. I had a headache like something else. We worked hard yesterday. What did we do in the morning? We went to the Barack Obama Presidential Library that just opened with a placard of Muammar Gaddafi that said anti-imperialist hero, and we all had copies of the Green Book, Gaddafi's Green Book, and we marched outside the Obama Presidential Library saying, long live Gaddafi, Obama killed Gaddafi. And that was an excellent, excellent moment, and I know for a fact that's already been viewed all over the world.
I've been on the bridge behind the Obama Library.
Oh no, what's there?
On the bridge behind the Obama Library is dozens of people writing Obama, drone bomb the wedding, Obama is a war criminal. There's dozens of them.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we took a lunch break, and then we went to the French consulate, and we unfurled our Ibrahim Traoré banner and said, France out of Africa, Ukraine out of Africa, and we stood with the Union of Sahel States. And the positive response we got from people was very, very amazing.
A lot of people were actually watching us, giving us a lot of eye contact and listening to what we were talking about. Because we covered all kinds of topics. I mean, we're always thinking about, there's so many topics, Ukraine, Israel, I mean, even the economic situation. Citibank right there, I had to mention Citibank.
The potential is out there. If people would do what CPI did, this would be a very, very different country. The problem is people aren't doing it. Well, we're doing it. We're doing it. And we want other people to do it with us. I'm going to get into now my analysis and my annual report. I just wanted to go over everything we've done. 2 ways in this life that you can find happiness. You can find happiness by connecting with other people and experiencing love and human connection, tenderness. And you can find happiness by building and constructing and creating something. And the Center for Political Innovation is built to enable people to do both of those things, because there is a real love and solidarity between us, and we are working to carry something out. And being in this organization has really, really meant a lot to a lot of people, myself included. There was a time I was kind of isolated by the left, and I couldn't be doing the activism that I once did. All the people that once appreciated me were calling me all kinds of nasty names, and I just wasn't meant to live biologically. And I knew I had to organize. And so I started the YouTube channel, and one thing led to another, and now we have CPI. 2020, CPI was born, and we just keep going. And it's a very, very exciting project. And I just can't tell the people in this room enough how much I care about them and how much your dedication to this project and your loyalty to this project means to me. We're doing something here, and we're setting an example here, and people are trying to catch up with what we're doing. We are a go, go, go organization that gets things done. We're getting things done, and our message is dare to struggle, dare to win! Dare to struggle, dare to win!
Dare to struggle, dare to win! Dare to struggle, dare to win!
Now, I'm going to say something I'm even now a little bit hesitant to say. And the reason that I'm hesitant to say it is because so many people were saying it long before we did. And they were saying it without any nuance, without any thought, without any analysis or sophistication. They were saying it in a childish kind of way, just going along with things. They were saying it on the command of mainstream media. Well, we're not doing this on the command of mainstream media. We're not saying this on the command of mainstream media. We're not saying this because we want to fit in with the New York Times. We're not saying this because we want to be liberals. We're saying it because it's just the reality. And what I'm going to say is, fuck Donald Trump. Fuck Donald Trump. Fuck Donald Trump. We gave him a chance. We gave him a chance. Let's be real. We went to his inauguration with a big banner, and we showed Donald Trump how he could go down in history, how he could be remembered. So we had a banner of him shaking hands with Kim Jong-un that said, "Only peace can make America great again." And we wrote a letter, a beautiful letter to President Donald Trump, you'll remember. A beautiful letter that we sent him about what he could do if he stood up to the Israel lobby, he stood up to the war makers, no new wars like he'd actually said. If he'd fulfilled his promises, why his face would be on Mount Rushmore, instead of him standing in front of Mount Rushmore on July 4th and giving some old man speech about the commies are coming to get us, the commies are coming to get us. Donald Trump had a chance, we gave him a chance, and he chose to betray the people, not only of the country in general, but of the people who voted for him. And I will say that our strategy during the 2024 elections, we did not endorse Trump. Let's be clear about that. We didn't endorse Kamala Harris, certainly. Our strategy was to boost the anti-war messaging within Trump's campaign. And that was the right thing to do. And I'll tell you why it was the right thing to do. Because when Donald Trump made this decision to attack Iran, Joe Kent, the U.S. counterterrorism director, stepped down and resigned in protest. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was the MAGA candidate, the MAGA congresswoman, she opposed it. Tucker Carlson opposed it. And a big section of the Trump camp had become so committed to that anti-war message that when Trump betrayed it, they didn't follow the Donald. And our boosting of the anti-war message within his campaign was very important and very strategic, and we have nothing to apologize for doing that. But we can still now say, fuck Donald Trump. I heard a joke. The joke is when Barron was younger, they wouldn't let Donald Trump go trick-or-treating with Barron because there was an unfortunate incident. Apparently, the rumor is that little Barron Trump was a big Harry Potter fan. And so, you know, he was going to go trick-or-treating with Donald Trump, and he was dressed in his Harry Potter costume, and he said, "Oh, Barron, what are you dressed as for Halloween?" He said, "I'm dressed as a wizard. I'm dressed as a wizard." And he said, "Really? That's amazing. You know, your grandfather, he was a wizard. He was a wizard. He was the best wizard. He was such a good wizard, they called him the Grand Wizard. That's what a good wizard he was." I've been sitting on that joke for years, folks. I've been sitting on it for years. So there you go. But one thing I do want to say to folks in the Republican camp, they talk about immigration, and we don't pretend that the fact that millions of people can't live in their own country and that they find dead bodies along the border of people trying to get here, we don't pretend that's a good thing. It's a bad situation that people can't live in their homelands and are fleeing. It's a bad situation. The solution to it is not criminalizing and terrorizing the immigrant communities, and fuck ICE and their violations of our rights, going into homes without warrants. Fuck ICE and their terrorism against the American working people. But at the same time, there is an issue there. But one thing I would say to anyone in the conservative camp who is concerned about immigration is there's a bit of a double standard. There's so many conservatives that are really, really angry at a guy from Guatemala or a guy from Honduras or a guy from El Salvador who's washing dishes to feed his kids to send money back home. But then they're totally okay with Miami Cubans or the Shahs of Sunset Park, or the Persians, or the Likudniks from Israel coming here and not only interfering in our politics, but trying to lobby us to get our kids killed in some war that has no benefit to the American people, right? Exactly. They are totally fine with these warmongering expats that come into our country and try to manipulate our politics, and they don't give a fuck about America. Let's be real. The Likudniks don't care about America. The Miami Cubans don't care about America. No, they don't. The Shahs of Sunset Park, they don't care about America. They want to settle the score with the regime back home. They want to get Americans killed for their own political agenda, for their own family vendetta. If you're concerned about foreign influence, if you're concerned about immigrants, shouldn't that be much more of a threat than some guy washing dishes? That's what I think more than anything. And that hypocrisy, I think we need to popularize this term, warmongering expats. Warmongering expats. We need to talk about the warmongering expats. I guess we are talking at this point about warmongering expats. We're obviously talking about the one who's now our Secretary of State, right? Marco Rubio, right? I guess, was he born here? His family are warmongering expats. I guess he was born here.
He was born here, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
American educated.
American only.
Yeah, exactly.
so a couple weeks ago, the U.S. State Department published a document going over allegations of Cuban influence in America, alleged Cuban influence in this country. And in that document, they mentioned a number of groups, and those groups that they mentioned were groups that are Democrat-aligned. Groups like the People's Forum and PSL, Trump derangement socialists that have ties to Cuba. We weren't mentioned because we're not one of those. When Biden was running the Department of Justice, when Biden was president, he sent the Department of Justice to go after the Uhuru movement because they're seen as criticizing Obama. He sent the Department of Justice to go after Scott Ritter, who's a lifelong Republican, who's anti-war. Now that Marco Rubio's in, he's sending the Department of Justice, and he's using his position as Secretary of State to target anti-war, anti-imperialist voices that are aligned with the Democratic Party, that are critical of the Republicans. We weren't mentioned in that document. We don't want to be. We don't want to be subpoenaed. We don't want to be harassed by the government. But something very, very strange is on that document. On page 45, with no explanation, no caption, it's not related to anything in the text, they included this photograph that we used. Isn't that interesting? Very weird. And this isn't the only time we've used this photograph, mind you. This was the cover of our textbook, Out of the Movement to the Masses. I have done whole streams about the history of where this photo came from, which is some of what we're going to get into today. And then we announced a couple weeks before the document was published that this was actually going to be the poster, and we released the poster of this convention. And this was on page 45 of their document about supposed Cuban influence with no explanation and all that. That says to me they're watching us, and they should be. Because we have something very, very special to offer, and we play a very, very important role. And I'm going to be getting into that later. But what is the history of this image? This image comes from July 4th, 1976, 50 years ago. And that was the bicentennial anniversary, the 200-year anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And there was a big patriotic rally with President Gerald Ford in Philadelphia to celebrate it. And the Communists of America, at that time, you had the new communist movement of the 1970s, various communist groups that were trying to form a new communist party that would be aligned with China, decided they were going to counter it. And there were actually two protests against it. July 4th, 1976. So flashback to the 70s, we're going to get some history. Anyone ever heard of the Weathermen, the Weather Underground? Yeah. The Weather Underground were underground, and they were doing their bombing campaign at that time. They were blowing things up. But they realized they weren't getting a lot of attention, so they started something called the Prairie Fire Organizing Committee, which was like their above-ground legal supporters network. People that were saying the Weathermen were good, but were not engaging in illegal activities. And they had loads and loads of money. Bill Ayers, who lives in this city, is one of the, I think he owns the power company or something in this city. He was one of these Weather Underground terrorists. They had loads and loads of money. So in January of 1976, they called a conference here in Chicago called the National Hard Times Conference. And it was to be a communist conference to plan for rallies to oppose the bicentennial. And they had a lot of money, and there were about 2,000 people there, and it was an utter shit show, from what I understand. There were people throwing chairs at each other and different communist groups fighting each other. It was kind of chaos. But out of that conference, they called for a rally to counter the bicentennial that would be called Bicentennial Without Colonies. And they announced that on July 4th in Philadelphia, we're going to have Bicentennial Without Colonies. But there was another group that existed, another communist group that existed back then called the Revolutionary Communist Party. They'd been called the Revolutionary Union, but in 1975 they changed their name. They were the Revolutionary Communist Party. They were not invited to that conference. They were banned. They were unwelcome from the National Hard Times Conference. They were being shunned. So they decided to call their own rally to counter the bicentennial on the other side of town. And so there's Bicentennial Without Colonies. They called their own rally, and their rally was called, "We've carried the rich for 200 years, now let's dump them off our backs."
When I get home from work each day, it feels like I just worked 200 years. When I see all the bills I gotta pay, seems like to take 200 years. And now we hear this summer celebrate the latest boss's game. But who they calling us when every day we're fighting them? 200 years. 200 years is bicentennial this fall. 200 years. The rich want us to stay for them. 200 more. 200 years. 100 years these parasites have sucked our blood. But let's get them off our backs. 200 Well, that must have been some party dumped that British tea back then 200 years. And that must have been some struggle dumping British tyranny back 200 years. But soon King George packing made the rich here free to build their own empire and change and wage slavery. 200 years. 200 years. This bicentennial is 200 years. The rich lost the slave for them. 200 more. 200 years. These parasites that suck our blood. Let's get them off our backs. 200 years is long enough.
And at that point, they controlled the Vietnam Veterans, the VVAW organization. They ran it, and that was the VVAW contingent at the "We've carried the rich for 200 years, now let's dump them off our backs" rally in 1976 on July 4th. And that was the contingent. And that photo is iconic. And that rally that the Revolutionary Communist Party did by themselves was much smaller. They had maybe 5,000 people, maybe only 2,000 people at their rally. Whereas the other rally that was called by all the other leftist groups had about 30,000, maybe even 60,000 people at it. But if you get on the internet today, it is almost impossible to find a picture of Bicentennial without colonies. Meanwhile, this image and other images from "We've Carried the Rich for 200 Years" are very easily found. And why is that? Bicentennial Without Colonies was a collection of different groups. The Black Panthers, the Puerto Rican Socialist Party, Native Americans bussed in from reservations, the LGBT movement, the feminist movement. There was a group of pagan witches who assembled and did some kind of witchcraft ceremony. And it was just a collection of people on the 200-year anniversary of America saying, "We're pissed." However, the RCP's rally was very, very pointed. And it wasn't a collection of different minorities. It was rather a statement on behalf of the immense majority, saying, "We've carried the rich for 200 years. Let's dump them off our backs. We won't fight another rich man's war." And that's very interesting. And that rally, even though it was much smaller, it carried a way bigger punch. It had a much bigger impact because it was speaking in a populist, majoritarian way. We're going to get back to that. But this organization, the VVAW, it wasn't the only anti-war organization among veterans of the Vietnam War that existed. VVAW was a lot of officers and others, but there was another group called the American Servicemen's Union, the ASU, and that was a much more working class organization. The VVAW allowed officers to join, whereas the American Servicemen's Union had the rule you couldn't be an officer, so it was only enlisted men who joined. And the American Servicemen's Union was started by a guy named Andy Stapp, who was a member of the Workers' World Party. And he started it, he had a newspaper called The Bond, and they would go to U.S. military bases, and they distributed thousands of copies of it. And he was kicked out of the Army for trying to start this union of active duty GIs, and they distributed thousands of copies of The Bond on military bases across the country. And it created kind of a national scandal. There were congressional investigations and such, and the American Servicemen's Union had a really, really big impact. And I had the honor of meeting Andy Stapp a few times when I lived in New York City. He was still living when I was an activist in New York City. He was a very, very kind man.
Have you ever asked yourself why we have had increasing trouble with discipline in our armed forces? Listen closely to the chairman of the American Servicemen's Union, and you will understand.
Okay, I'm going to run down some stuff tonight about the GI revolts and rebellions that have been going on in the U.S. Army over the last year, the organizing drive that we're undertaking. But before I do that, I got something real important here. Korean people have asked the American Servicemen's Union to send their greetings to the revolutionary young people in America. And they sent us a letter, which I'm going to read. Dear Andy, our thinking is that the ASU and the People's Korea will combine efforts in chopping the head off U.S. imperialism. Will combine efforts in chopping the head off U.S. imperialism and tearing its limbs in concert with the revolutionary people the world over, in mutilating the U.S. ruling circles, fully supporting the ASU. You will readily agree with us in this respect, I believe. Yes, right on. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea is the banner of freedom and independence of our people, and also a powerful weapon of building socialism and communism. Your contributions will greatly encourage the Korean people in their struggle to achieve an independent, peaceful unification of the fatherland, accomplishing the complete victory of socialism and communism. The ASU is playing a leading role in this fight, in this organizing drive. We have chapters of the American Servicemen's Union on 60 large military installations in the United States and 40 overseas. Just as the Bolshevik Party organized through the Soviets in 1917 against the Tsar and the oppression in Russia, the American Servicemen's Union is organizing Soviets within the U.S. imperialist army. The only line that's going to lead to victory, and revolution is a proletarian line in the army. And they know that whoever can command the allegiance of the rank and file troops, that command is going to be decisive in revolution or counter-revolution. And right now, the American Servicemen's Union is building an army within an army, a workers' militia inside the U.S. Army. And along with the Panthers and others, we're going to make that revolution. Power of the people.
And I found out that after the Vietnam War was over and after the American Servicemen's Union was no longer doing their thing, he moved to North Korea. And he lived in North Korea for 2 years. For 2 years, he was a resident of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And every day, he would go to the DMZ, where they had sound systems set up, and he would urge the GIs on the other side to go home and say, you don't belong here in Korea, the Korean people don't want you here. And he would every day broadcast in English across the DMZ, urging the American GIs to go home. And he lived in North Korea. It was deeply, deeply moving that he did that. So, yeah, Andy Stapp, presente. And after he came back to the United States, he ended up being a high school teacher in Hoboken. And he taught social studies and history. And at his memorial, I got to hear some of his former students talk about what he was like to have as a teacher. And that was really inspiring. We got to remember the people who've sacrificed and given to this movement. Andy Stapp, presente. This was the VVAW, Vietnam Veterans Against the War. Who was the leader of Vietnam Veterans Against the War when it was founded? You know who it was? John Kerry. John Kerry started VVAW. He served as an officer in Vietnam, and when he came back, he became an anti-war protester, and for the first year of VVAW, he was the public face of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. And
we could come back to this country, and we could be quiet. We could hold our silence. We could not tell what went on in Vietnam. But we feel because of what threatens this country, we have to speak out. Millions of men who have been taught to deal and to trade in violence, and who are given the chance to die for the biggest nothing in history. Men who have returned with a sense of anger and a sense of betrayal which no one has yet grasped. We're asking Americans to think about that. Because how do you ask a man to be the last man to die in Vietnam? How do you ask a man to be the last man to die for a mistake?
Then he moved on and they became much more radical, and this was when they were run by the Revolutionary Communist Party. But John Kerry, that is a name that pulls up a lot inside of me. So John Kerry, he was a U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, and he was the U.S. presidential candidate for the Democrat Party in 2004. And then he was Secretary of State during Barack Obama's second term. And his 2004 campaign was the first election that I was intensely involved in, as a young person. I couldn't vote yet, but I really hated Bush and I hated the war. And my family, we were the only Democrats in this little town of conservatives. And it was my town almost turned into a 24/7 military parade after 9/11. So I felt very much opposed to Bush. And so I paid close attention during that election. And I look back on that election now. I didn't think this then. But I look back on that election in 2004. That whole election where John Kerry ran for president on the Democrat platform, that whole election was some kind of weird psychological operation. It was one of the most bizarre things I'd ever seen. So John Kerry had a record as an anti-war activist. But yet, the Democrats launched the campaign with a documentary about how he was a hero in Vietnam and he had been on this swift boat and he was this amazing fighter who'd won medals and all of this. And in this documentary the Democrats screened everywhere, it was acknowledged that one of the medals that John Kerry had won in Vietnam, he was on a boat that went up and down the rivers, was for shooting a 13-year-old boy. A 13-year-old boy. He would go up and down the rivers, and there was a 13-year-old boy who allegedly, they said, had a gun or was trying to fight the U.S. or whatever, and he shot a 13-year-old boy and killed a 13-year-old boy. That's what he got his medal for. But the Democratic Party was showing this documentary about John Kerry was a hero on the swift boat, and that's what you got to do. And what was weird was that everybody who was voting for John Kerry was against the war. People were voting for John Kerry because they were opposed to Bush's attack on Iraq. But yet John Kerry's campaign, even though he had been an anti-war activist, was all about he's a war hero. You remember at the Democratic National Convention, when he accepted the nomination, he got up, he said, "John Kerry, reporting for duty."
I'm John Kerry, and I'm reporting for duty.
And it was one of the most bizarre things. And then what happened?
He lost.
Well, how did he lose? He lied.
Yeah.
He lied. Right? One thing is when he had been a VVAW activist, they'd all assembled and thrown their medals over the fence. And so they asked him, "Did you throw your medals over the fence?" "Oh no, I only threw the ribbons. I keep my medals." And so throughout the campaign, people kept saying, "Where are these medals? Where are these medals if you didn't throw them over the fence?" There's video of him throwing his medals over the fence, and he lied about it. And then the last couple weeks of the election, they came out with the Swift boat ads. And other guys who had served on the boat with him said he wasn't really the hero. They had lied in the documentary about him.
If you have any question about what John Kerry's made of, just spend 3 minutes with the men who served with him 30 years.
I served with John Kerry.
I served with John Kerry. John Kerry has not been honest about what happened in Vietnam.
He is lying about his record.
I know John Kerry is lying about his first Purple Heart because I treated him for that injury.
John Kerry lied to get his Bronze Star. I know. I was there. I saw what happened.
His account of what happened and what actually happened are the difference between night and day.
John Kerry has not been honest.
And he lacks the capacity to lead.
When the chips were down, you could not count on John Kerry.
John Kerry is no war hero.
He betrayed all his shipmates. He lied before the Senate.
And John Kerry betrayed the men and women he served with in Vietnam.
He dishonored his country. He most certainly did.
I served with John Kerry. John Kerry cannot be trusted.
Swift Boat Veterans for Truth is responsible for the content of this advertisement.
And so he ended up losing. And he lost the campaign. And you look back on that whole thing, his platform throughout the whole campaign was to send more troops to Iraq, even though all the people voting for him were voting for him because they wanted to stop the war. I don't think John Kerry was ever intended to win. I think the whole campaign was just a psychological operation, and that explains what they did to Howard Dean, right? We talk about cancel culture now. This guy, Howard Dean, what did he do? He didn't send a picture of himself to anybody. He didn't grope anybody. All he did is go, "Yeah!" And they destroyed his career, right?
Howard Dean's falling far and fast here, and he's got no one to blame but himself.
He's in some trouble here with Democratic primary voters. They're concerned about his behavior. He did it himself. They saw it. It's an emotional thing. It's a feeling thing. People see it, feel uncomfortable. That's very difficult to overcome.
Dean's now in a statistical tie with John Kerry, but the trends suggest he will soon fall behind. Dean suffered 2 setbacks in Iowa. The first, his disappointing third-place finish. The second, and far more damaging, was this.
We're going to South Carolina and Oklahoma and Arizona and North Dakota and New Mexico. We're going to California and Texas and New York. And we're going to South Dakota and Oregon and Washington and Michigan. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House. Yeah!
Before that defining moment, 57% of New Hampshire Democrats had a favorable impression of Dean, only 19% an unfavorable impression. But the day after Iowa, Dean's favorable number here dropped to 39%. His unfavorable number rose to 30%.
He's going to lose not only his core support, some of his core support, but he's going to cut right down to a smaller base.
On the question of which candidate can best beat President Bush, Dean now trails Kerry by 14 points.
Howard Dean seemed to actually be a real candidate. And they wanted to have a fake election to run a psyop on the American people that were opposed to the war. The 2004 campaign was very, very odd, but it was the shape of things to come in so many ways. Because one aspect of that campaign that I will never forget is, you know, John Kerry and George W. Bush were the candidates. They're very, very similar, right? They both went to Yale. They were both members of the Skull and Bones Society, the same secret society. They were both Zionists and extreme supporters of Israel. They both wanted to send more troops to Iraq and escalate the war. They had basically the same platform, but the campaign was done in Hollywood. There were 2 movies that came out that summer. Do you remember that? I think it was Pat Buchanan. He said, this year the election is Michael Moore versus Mel Gibson. And that's what it was, because that summer all the people who voted for Bush went to go see Passion of the Christ, and all the people that voted for Kerry went to go see Fahrenheit 9/11 by Michael Moore. And what was interesting was that both Michael Moore and Mel Gibson were anti-Israel. Michael Moore had dedicated his book to Rachel Corrie, the activist from, I think, Seattle or Oregon, who'd been killed. And Mel Gibson has said many anti-Israel things and gotten himself in a lot of trouble. And his father is a traditionalist Catholic. And so even though the 2 candidates were Zionists and had the exact same platform, the 2 major films, to rev up the base, if you will, were made by people that were anti-Israel and had talked about the power of the Israel lobby. It's very, very interesting. The power of the Israel lobby beneath the surface is a big, big thing that people have known about for a long time. It's an open secret. And deep down, people within the political establishment have been angry about it for a long time. Every so often, there are just little hints that you'll hear from elected officials and from the government. They'll do something to just kind of diss Israel, to just, you know. Yeah, John Kerry, as he was going out as Secretary of State, huge supporter of Israel and all that. But you remember, he refused to protect Israel from a UN resolution condemning them. And then he gave this big speech and he said, Israel can be democratic or Jewish, it can't be both, which was very carefully worded to be offensive, to kind of stick it to somebody. And that both sides, Republicans and Democrats, kind of resent the fact that the Israel lobby tells them what to do and that this country doesn't really have its sovereignty. And it's probably much more blatantly obvious behind closed doors to them than it is to us. I mean, now it's very, very obvious, but even back then people knew. And that's very, very, very interesting. But the name John Kerry means something to me as well. It means something to me because of an experience that many people here know all about, but there are probably other people here for the first time that haven't heard about this, which was my life changed in 2015. In 2015, I was working with Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General. I was doing some international media work, and I was invited to go on a humanitarian mission to Yemen with the Red Crescent Society of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I got on a boat, and at the time that was happening, the P5+1 nuclear talks were taking place. John Kerry was in Geneva negotiating with Javad Zarif. And it was the Iran nuclear deal negotiations were going on. And I had gone to a conference in Iran, and I went to that conference in Iran, and then I came back, and then they invited me to go back and be part of this humanitarian mission. So as an activist, I thought, you know, the people of Yemen are being bombed by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is being supported by the United States. I want to support it. So I got on a boat, and there were some other Americans that were supposed to go on the boat, and they backed out at the last minute. And they took me aside and they said, don't do this, Caleb. You're going to get arrested when you come back to the United States. They're going to say you were helping the Revolutionary Guards or something like that. You're going to get arrested if you do this. And I said, well, you know, I didn't go all the way from New York City to Tehran and all the way from Tehran to Bandar Abbas to go back home. You know, I'm getting on this boat. I got on the boat, and I was the only American. There was a French citizen on the boat, and there was a guy from Senegal on the boat. There was a guy from Germany on the boat, and everyone else was an Iranian. And I was on this boat, the Iran Shahid rescue ship of the humanitarian Red Crescent Society. I was on that boat for 13 days. I guess I didn't realize what I was getting into, because as soon as our boat departed, Israel and Saudi Arabia both announced that we were smuggling weapons to Yemen, which was not true, and that a strike on the boat would be justified. And Reuters interviewed me from the boat, and they said, did you know that Israel and Saudi Arabia have said they got the right to blow this boat up? And I was thinking, oh boy, what have I gotten myself into? And I'm on this boat, and I'm surrounded by Iranians, not many of whom were English speakers, but of those who were, they wanted to talk to me about religion the whole time, because many of them had never met a Christian before. And they asked me, because I came from a Christian family, they said, what do Christians think about Moses? What do Christians think about the end times? What do Christians think about Jesus? What do Christians think about the afterlife? And we talked about religion for 13 days, and we saw planes flying overhead. And as I'm on this boat, and I'm sitting there going, I'm a kid from a small town in Ohio. how in the world did I end up in New York City, and now I went to Iran, and now I'm on this boat? How in the world did this happen? And I started having these eerie dreams. And I would dream of the Vacation Bible School. My grandmother, she was a Lutheran, and there was this little Lutheran church. It was painted white, and it was surrounded by cornfields. You could not see another building from it. And as I was talking to these Iranians about religion all day long, and as I was fearing for my life, I would then go to sleep, and I kept dreaming that I was inside of my grandmother's Lutheran church. And I was walking through it, and it was completely empty. And needless to say, on that ship, I reconnected with Heavenly Parent, with God. And I had a spiritual experience. And my life changed. And it was something I will never forget. And when I came back, something was off. I just couldn't fit in with the communist groups. Something was off. There was something wrong. And I would go to the meetings of the activist groups I was with, and I would think, God damn it, can't you take this seriously? People are dying. Something was off. And so that brings me back to this picture. So I told you that the reason they had to have a separate rally was the Revolutionary Union, the Revolutionary Communist Party. They were not invited to the meeting to call the main rally, so they had to have their own rally. Why were they not invited? Well, they were not invited because in 1974, 2 years prior, there had been the anti-busing riots in Boston. They were trying to desegregate schools, and there were a lot of racist white Bostonians who were against it and had gone out and thrown rocks at buses, etc. And at the time, the left was very confused about what to do about it, because we now know school desegregation was not done because Wall Street just really cares about black children and wants them to have an opportunity. Desegregation was done because there are certain ethnic enclaves in urban areas. If you go to any urban center, the cops tend to be Irish, you have Italian, and the jobs are handed out on kind of a nepotistic basis. And public servants' jobs are very much reliant on these kind of ethnic communities. And to bring in austerity and privatizations, they needed to break apart the ethnic communities from which civil servants are drawn in urban areas. And this is now all admitted. You can read what the Ford Foundation, they admitted this, that they wanted to break apart the kind of ethnic associations based in neighborhoods like in Boston and New York and Philadelphia and Detroit and places like that. They were trying to bring in degrowth. Plus, who else opposed busing? It wasn't just racist white Bostonians, it was also the Black Panthers. They said it wouldn't be fair for black kids to have to go to school with kids who didn't look like them. And they wanted black schools for black children that taught black revolutionary ideology. And I think the Uhuru movement would also agree with that. And so black nationalists were opposed to busing. And we now know that busing was being done in order to bring in austerity and break apart communities. So the left had to decide what to do. Most of the left just went along with the idea, well, we have to support school desegregation. Well, the RU, the RCP, they made a mistake, I would say. They made a mistake. They said that they wanted to support the anti-busing riots. Now, they shouldn't have done that. When people are throwing rocks at black children, you don't want to support that. But why did they make this mistake? And I will read you what they actually wrote to defend their position. They said, those who think the way to stand with black people and other oppressed nationalities is to attack white workers as simply a bunch of racists, who think the ruling class is a friend of the oppressed, can at best only drag of the tail of the struggle, and if they continue in this path, can only end up falling backwards completely into the camp of the ruling class. Very prophetic words. They were pointing to a reality that if you start aligning with the ruling class and you start lining up with the people in power, and if you demonize working people who might not agree with something the people in power are doing and just dismiss them as a pack of racists, pretty soon you're going to be on the wrong side. They were right about that. They made the mistake of their busing position, but they had that understanding busing wasn't coming from a good place, and that we shouldn't be appealing to the government of the United States as if they're a champion of black people. We shouldn't be dismissing the Bostonian working class as a pack of racists. And they took that position. And they were immediately castigated and banned from leftist spaces and called racist and fascist and all of that. And that's why they were not welcome. And it shows you that there's always been an element on the left that is really, really terrified of anything that looks like this. Anything that looks populist. Here you have black and white together. We won't fight another rich man's war, fighting for the immense majority. The Communist Manifesto actually says every previous political movement in history has been a movement on behalf of a minority, but we fight for the immense majority. That's in the Communist Manifesto. And they had a rally speaking to the immense majority. We've carried the rich for 200 years. Let's get them off our back, and let's have unity on the basis of class struggle against the rich. And there's a section of the left that's always been terrified of that. There's something weird that happened during the 2024 election cycle. Kamala Harris was running against Trump, and the Democratic Socialists of America was doing their thing. And one of their professors, a guy named Aidan Beatty, who teaches at Wayne State University, he's an Irish American, published a smear book against Jerry Healy. Now, who's Jerry Healy? Jerry Healy was the leader of the Workers' Revolutionary Party in Britain. He's been dead for 35 years. But randomly, during the 2024 election cycle, DSA decided to publish this smear book against Jerry Healy. And I have been fascinated by Jerry Healy because of Libya and Gaddafi. Jerry Healy was a personal friend of Gaddafi, and he led the Workers' Revolutionary Party in Britain. He was a Trotskyist. He was friends with the actress Vanessa Redgrave, who joined his organization and ran for office. And Jerry Healy was a pivotal figure in the Palestine movement because at that time, Palestine was still kind of a taboo subject to talk about on the left.
It wasn't just Zionist forces alone that did this job. They had the assistance of Italian radar. They had the assistance of Moroccan radar. And they had the assistance of the American installations inside Tunis of a radar nature. Therefore, it was an international imperialist assassination. That's the first thing we must understand. The second is why, on this occasion, our brother was so guarded so lightly. 2 guards and an old man, an old gardener, in a situation in which the most tremendous mass movement of social revolutionary character is looked upon as that. All the masses are involved. And when all the masses are involved, the Palestinian masses are involved, it's a social revolution. And history teaches us this, that when times when you're leading a socialist revolution, that the imperialist world will seek out your death. And if Lenin had to go into hiding 3 months between July and October in the Soviet Union, before the October 1917 revolution, it was because, and other leaders of the Bolshevik Party had to go into hiding, it was because the enemy always strikes at the leadership.
But Jerry Healy talked about it. And Vanessa Redgrave, the actress, she actually got money from Gaddafi, and she mortgaged her house, and they made the first pro-Palestine film that was ever widely circulated. It was called The Palestinians. And the Academy Awards was threatened the year that she won the Oscar. The JDL said they were going to blow up the Academy Awards if she won, but they gave her the Oscar anyway. And so on national television, she accepted the Oscar, and she said, I want to thank the Academy Awards for giving me this Oscar and for not succumbing to the threats of a group of Zionist thugs and hoodlums who are a disgrace to the memory of Jewish people everywhere. Yeah, that is a quote, and she got booed like crazy. You don't want to say that to the Academy Awards, but she had the courage to say it.
First of all, I had to say what I had to say about Zionism, because the Zionists are using the same methods as Hitler and the German fascists. Zionism is a racist ideology, like the German fascist Nazi ideology, and they're using the same methods against the Palestinian people and the Arab people, against the Arab nation. It is a completely Nazi Hitler method the Zionist method. The Zionism is not only a threat and a danger, a mortal danger, and a force of evil against the Palestinians, against the Arab nation, it is a danger against people all over the world.
Yes.
And so, this is why we owe such a debt to the Palestinians.
And you made it jeopardizing your stardom.
Of course.
Bearing in mind all risks.
Stardom would be worth nothing if I was not identified with the millions of people who are in struggle to defend their rights, and first and foremost of this is the Palestinian people and the Arab nation.
And that was because of Jerry Healy. Because Jerry Healy had built the Workers' Revolutionary Party, he'd recruited this Hollywood actress, he'd had her make these pro-Palestine films, and Jerry Healy was the forefront of pro-Palestine activism in Britain. So what happened? Well, a couple of years later, the press in Britain accused the Workers' Revolutionary Party of being a cult, practicing mind control, and they accused Jerry Healy of all kinds of stuff which never amounted to anything. There were never any charges, etc. And they destroyed the organization. And this all happened in 1985. This is a really long time ago. So why in the world did DSA decide to publish a book about it in the year of 2024? Well, I read the book. The book is full of a lot of deception and misunderstandings, and I will say the folks at the World Socialist website, because some of their people actually knew Jerry Healy, have done a really good job showing that it's just full of lies. I mean, it starts out by saying Jerry Healy claimed that his father had been murdered by the Black and Tans, by the British military, and that never happened. Jerry Healy never claimed that. There's not one place that it's ever documented Jerry Healy ever even made this claim, but it starts out by saying, oh, he lied about how his father died, and from there, and it's just full of naivete. But why in the world did they publish it in the middle of the 2024 elections? Well, go to the acknowledgments in the book. Who paid for it? The Center for Jewish Studies, a pro-Israel funded outlet. And Aidan Beatty, the author of it, a DSA author, says he wanted to thank the Center for Jewish Studies for understanding the global and international implications of this work. What's that? What is that about? Well, if you read the book, Jerry Healy is Hitler. When he says that the media is biased against the pro-Palestine movement, he's saying Jews secretly control the media, and he's building a cult of personality, and he's a fascist, and he's Hitler.
But he starts by saying that Healy lied when he claimed that he saw his father killed by the Black and Tans. In fact, Healy never made such a claim. There is not a single account based on documents, based on anything Healy wrote, in which he made such a statement. These are all post-1985 hearsays. We will be publishing very shortly a interview with Irish comrades who knew Jerry Healy in the 1960s, who testified that Healy never made such a claim. I have spoken to Healy's daughter, who is not referenced, by the way, by Aidan Beatty. He never made such a claim. He also claimed this is an entire lie, and it's very important.
Okay, can you kind of wrap it up?
You let other people speak for a group.
Well, yeah, there are other people who are on the panel.
Well, but I think I'm speaking as somebody who has firsthand knowledge of Jerry Healy.
There are other people that have firsthand knowledge.
I know, and you should let me finish what I'm saying. I'll be finished within 5 minutes.
Well,
the other point he says,
you've already had more than.
Obviously, you don't want me to speak and expose this. He also claims, and which is entirely untrue, that Healy manufactured his history. He did nothing of the sort. He claims that Healy came from an area of Ireland which was relatively quiet. In fact, Healy was born in one of the most violent areas of the Civil War and Revolution.
That's 100% inaccurate. You have no idea what you're talking about. You are an uninformed clown.
No. Okay, and look. You don't. And by the way, in one point, in which you don't explain in your own book.
David, we're prepared. David,
I'm not a Zionist, you clown.
David, for the last 10 years of your academic career, you have been extensive. Well, you're muting me the moment I raise issues relating to his background. Well, you're not letting me speak.
Okay, so
limited amount of time to.
Okay, but you don't.
Mr. Beatty is a subject. Why was he financed?
Okay, look, David.
What was your application
David,
to the
do I have
Israeli
to remove
and
you
other
from the
institutes to
meeting?
get money?
David, do I
Why
have to
did they
remove
give you
you from the meeting?
Because I'm an academic.
No, you're not. You're not working as. What was the basis?
David, do I have to remove you from the meeting?
Which led.
David, do I have to remove you from the meeting?
The issue of violence, sexual allegations, all of this was developed and utilized in the autumn of 1985 by Banda and Slaughter in order to shut down any discussion of the political circumstances which had led to the degeneration of the WRP. Now, as again for Aidan Beatty's book, whether he likes it or not, he presents himself as a historian. And whatever his opinions may be, or other people's opinions may be of the political line of the WRP, that's one matter. There are many people who write biographies of people with whom they don't agree politically, with whom they have differences, but there are certain rules of scholarship. And historians work with documents. He doesn't work with documents. He went into this project. He says he doesn't even remember when he first heard of Jerry Healy. Well, he's not telling the truth. He was active at the DSA at Wayne State University in Detroit. He's very familiar with our political work at Wayne State University. The DSA, of which he's a member, called Police Against Us. He's aware of all of this.
No,
he's not a politically ignorant man. And when he says, by the way, when he says in his acknowledgments that organizations which are in fact pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist organizations were generous enough to see the global and international implications of Healy's activities in the Middle East, well, he should tell us, I'd like to see the document he wrote requesting funding. He is a man who does have a very long and documented history, which can be easily verified, of being funded by Israeli organizations. He also argues, and it's central to his whole conception of Irish nationalism, that Zionism and Irish nationalism are essentially equivalent movements. When anyone who's familiar with the subject knows that the Irish movement, the Irish Republic movement, is one of the great democratic national movements of the late 19th and early 20th century. Zionism is a colonialist movement. To compare the two is a fraud. And we're making the accusation here that this is, in fact, a factional diatribe which was produced using history as a cover to essentially launch a scurrilous attack on Jerry Healy. And
what Aidan Beatty is subtly doing with the book is he's warning leftists about the danger that amid these pro-Palestine protests and demonstrations, somebody like Jerry Healy might emerge once again. And Jerry Healy, just like the RU or the RCP was canceled and smeared and isolated, Jerry Healy's group was subject to a similar defamation. And it's very, very interesting. I wrote my book, Trotsky and the Neoconservatives, talking about how in the world is it that the followers of this Russian revolutionary, a lot of them ended up being Pentagon strategists. What was this really about? Well, I wrote my book about that, and the conclusion that I came to was it really gets down to something that Vladimir Lenin wrote about called the spirit of the ghetto. Right? There was a group of Jewish folks in Russia that refused to join the Bolsheviks. They said we have to have our own party because Jews are just so special and so different that we can never be in the same organization as non-Jews, and we have to have our own party. And Lenin, who was himself of Jewish descent, condemned that, and he called it the spirit of the ghetto. The idea that Jews should be isolated. And he said that Zionism is the ultimate expression of the spirit of the ghetto. Zionism, the narrative of Zionism. If you want to understand Zionism, go watch a Sacha Baron Cohen movie. Right? No, I'm serious. The movie Borat. So who is Borat? Borat is basically a caricature. He's an attack on Muslims, and he's an attack on the former Soviet Union. They found like the perfect medium. They could attack both the former Soviet Union and the Islamic world. And he's this dumb guy who walks around saying, Jew, 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 I am dumb anti-Semite, Jew have horns. You know, he's a caricature. But what's the point of the Borat movie? Sacha Baron Cohen dresses in his costume and goes around pretending to be this ignorant anti-Semite from Kazakhstan. Oh, I hate the Jew, I kill Jew. But what is he saying? What is he doing? He's drawing out. He goes to a rodeo and he gets one of the cowboy guys. He says, oh, in my country, if you're gay, they kill you. And he says, that's what we want to do here, and gets on a bus with a group of frat boys and gets them to tell a bunch of racist jokes. What's the message of the film? The message of the film is that deep down, Americans are just like Borat. That's the message of the film, that deep down, Americans are no better than the former Soviet people and the Muslims of the world, and that deep down, all of us are just a bunch of Jew-hating anti-Semites who want to kill the Jew, and we're ignorant and we're stupid, and that's why you need Israel, the special place that they can go to get away from us inferior rabble, us cattle, us human cattle that are not part of the chosen people. That's what the spirit of the ghetto is, and that's Zionism. Lenin wasn't just calling out Zionism. He was calling out the Bund. They weren't Zionists, but they still held on to that idea that we must be separate. And what the spirit of the ghetto really incarnates is anti-populism. The idea that the majority of the American people are the problem, and that any mass movement on behalf of the majority of the people is somehow fascist or Nazi, or it means they're going to kill everybody. That is the spirit of the ghetto. And that's what Trotsky believed. And that's why Trotsky refused to organize the peasantry. And that's why Trotsky condemned Stalin as Asiatic. If you read the biography, Asiatic, not one of us sophisticated Western people. That's what Trotsky believed. He did not love the Russian people. He was loyal to an agenda of chaos and instability because it would break apart an establishment and an order he was threatened by. But he did not want to help the Russian people. And Stalin believed in socialism in one country. And he did the 5-year economic plans, and he turned the Soviet Union into an industrial powerhouse. And he built up a strong country. Stalin and Trotsky had a divergent perspective. And Trotsky was very much putting forward that spirit of the ghetto mindset. And a group of his followers who broke with him when he refused to completely throw the Russian Revolution under the bus, they were in the United States, the New York intellectuals. They ended up working for the CIA. And they used that kind of anti-populist, destructive mindset first to create the New Left with the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program that was chaired by Irving Kristol, and later with neoconservatism that happened in the 1970s and 80s as they went into the Republican Party. And the message is always the same. Leo Strauss was a professor who was very influential on the neocons. He was never a Trotskyist, but he was a philosophy professor. And his message was that all the great philosophers of the world have always had to write in code. Because if the average people knew what they really believed, they would persecute them. And that he saw Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union as the same thing, and he saw them as expressions of democracy, extreme democracy. If ordinary people get together, we're buffoons and we're fools, and we're going to persecute the great intellectuals. And what makes America great is that they're not able to do that, and that we have a society where the smart ones can rise to the top and the other people are controlled. Leo Strauss's favorite TV show was Gunsmoke, the old cowboy western where the good guy wears a white hat and is all good, the bad guy wears a black hat, has no redeeming quality, and he said that's how average people need to understand the world and foreign policy. They can't understand the nuances. And the noble lie was a big point in his work, the idea that it's okay to lie to people because the average people are just so stupid. So if we have to tell them that Saddam Hussein's got weapons of mass destruction and he's going to kill us all, or that Iran is building a nuclear bomb, it's okay to lie to them because they're too stupid. They can't understand it like us smart people are. And we're on a crusade to spread freedom and individualism to protect the intellectuals all over the world. That is the neocon ideology. Please don't think I'm blaming this on the Jews. I'm not, because it comes from Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche was not Jewish, he was quite anti-Semitic, but his worldview was this same view. It's called philosophical irrationalism. It is the belief that there is no real truth and that the great individual defines their own truth by imposing it onto the world, and that any attempt to give a grand narrative to explain human history is simply totalitarian or propaganda or groupthink. It's the philosophy of the Ubermensch who defines reality for himself. That is what is behind the neoconservative ideology and the Trotskyite synthetic left. It is that belief, that rejection of the need to build a mass movement, that contempt for the masses of people. And that's what I wanted to talk about here today. After I came back from my trip to Iran and the humanitarian mission, I was pretty badly canceled. And that was an interesting experience, and as I've investigated what happened to the RU, and as I've seen what they've still done to Jerry Healy, decades after his death, that's made me think. I talked here about patterns. I opened the speech by talking about patterns. Patterns is something that human beings draw their stability and their security from patterns. When I talked about that, that brought me to an understanding of psychoanalysis. Freudian psychoanalysis teaches that mental illness is rooted in how we interpret patterns with our mind. There are two types of mental illness. There is what is called neurosis. That cliche about Albert Einstein or insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Neurosis means there are patterns going on in your life that you're not picking up on. There are patterns that you just are unaware of, and so you keep getting yourself into unhappy situations, and everyone is neurotic. You might think you're the most healthy person, but in some way you're a little bit neurotic. What Sigmund Freud tried to do with his clients was to help them see the patterns they weren't seeing and become less and less neurotic. That's neurosis. The more deadly form of mental illness, the more extreme form of mental illness, is called psychosis. And psychosis is not when there's patterns that you're not recognizing, it's the opposite. When you start inventing patterns that are not there. When you start creating a narrative in your mind and hearing voices that are not there and creating a story in your head, and that's to protect yourself from extreme pain. That's what psychosis is. It's a defense mechanism. When people are so afraid and so upset and feeling so much anxiety, their mind just starts inventing a false world and they kind of withdraw from the world. That's why I want to talk about someone that I really, really admire. I had the honor of meeting him. I've met him a couple times, but once I got to interview him, and that's the great Roger Waters. What a hero Roger Waters is. Yeah. What a hero. Have you faced retaliation for the stances you've taken?
Huge amounts of retaliation for the last 20 years, solidly from the Israeli lobby. Yeah, they've tried to destroy my career over and over and over and over again, and they're still doing it constantly, all day, every day, and all night too. Sometimes today. And we will turn this up again, because what they're doing is insane, criminally insane. Genocide is just ultimately the worst crime that any of us have ever dreamt of, and they're doing it in front of our eyes. And it's not just the Israelis, it's Keir Starmer, it's the UK government, the Americans, the French, the Germans. The Germans have recently banned my movie in Germany. Can't be shown. Roger Waters made that movie. It's a great movie, by the way. I would recommend anybody to go and see it. It's called This Is Not a Drill, which is interesting that that's a proper title for a rock and roll show. I don't mean to shout over this lady.
No, and what would you like to say to the younger people getting involved in Palestine activism?
Get involved and keep getting involved. Do what I do. When you wake up in the morning, think to yourself, what can I do today? And then do it. Doesn't matter what it is. The main thing is that your heart has been stirred, that you've recognized the love and truth in what we're all saying here today. And that we have to put a stop to the occupation of Palestine. Yeah, the genocide, that's the first thing. We have to get rid of the occupying army. They have to relent. We must free Palestine, the country, from the river to the sea.
The Wall is about psychosis. That's what the film is about. It's about a guy who's had a lot of trauma and pain in his life and a lot of hardship, and he goes into a hotel room and he becomes psychotic. He isolates himself from the world. You know, that song, Comfortably Numb, that's really what that's about. You're withdrawing. It talks about hearing the voices and you can't hear what the people are saying because you're just so in your own world. And how does The Wall end? The Wall ends with the wall tearing down. The way to cure himself is to connect with other people. That's how it ends, right? The triumph is that he connects with his peers. The Wall is the isolation of psychosis, and it's connecting with other people that enables him to get beyond it. It's actually a very, very beautiful piece, The Wall, the concept album and then the movie that Roger Waters created. And it was very brave of him to do. He's revealing a lot about his own life and his father who died and the hardships he had. It's a really powerful, powerful piece that he made. There's some crass cartoons in there, and genitals marching around and stuff like that I'm not too fond of. Some other things in the movie that maybe aren't my best thing, but The Wall is really a powerful piece. It's just really emotionally potent. It's very, very loaded. But I want to talk about another piece by Roger Waters that I really like, because he did Shine On You Crazy Diamonds. Do you know Shine On You Crazy Diamonds? That's a beautiful song, and if you listen to it, that's what CPI is about. He wrote it for Syd Barrett, one of the founders of Pink Floyd. His best friend who blew his mind with drugs. And as Pink Floyd was becoming more popular and famous, he couldn't be there. And so the album was Wish You Were Here, wishing that his friend could be there. But then the song Shine On You Crazy Diamonds is he's like shaking his friend. Can you just show the world your brilliance? I know you have something beautiful to offer the world, but you're not able to do it. Saying wake up and show the world your brilliance. That's what CPI is all about. We're saying shine on you crazy diamonds. Wake up, show the brilliance, learn to think. We're trying to awaken people. That's what we're doing. really beautiful. Roger Waters, got to give a tribute to him. Say something about the Yemenis and how the Yemeni people have stood with Palestine.
The Yemenis are, the Houthis. Their response to this has been quite remarkable. And when the USA pulls the full power of its, of its army at them, they go, "We're doing the right thing," and they are. Standing with the people of Palestine is the right thing to do today. So we stand with the Houthis and with the people of Yemen, and we have done all the way through.
Thank you.
All right, you're very.
I'm here in Chicago. I love being in Chicago. Next year we're going to LA. We're doing this in Los Angeles next year, so that'll be good for some of our LA members. But yeah, Chicago was one of my favorite places when I was a kid because my uncle died when I was 11 years old. But before he died, he lived here in this city. He was a professor at DePaul University. He taught acting. He was just such a great person. And he was my hero. I lived in a small town, but coming to Chicago, where he had his actor friends, and he was in Hollywood movies, and he was talking about different ideas, he was my hero. He had Marfan syndrome, and he tragically died at the age of 45. But I really looked up to him. It was at my uncle's funeral. When I was 11 years old, my uncle was a Scotch-Irishman, Protestant Irish, like my family. That's the descendants that we're from. And I remember being there with my mom and my grandparents. We're sitting there in the theater where like 300 of his friends, all the people he's touched throughout his life, are there mourning his passing. And then a bagpiper comes out. What were they playing? They were playing the Skyboat song. That was the first time I ever heard the Skyboat song. Do we know the Skyboat song? That's a very, very traditional Scottish ballad. It's mourning the loss of Bonnie Prince Charlie. As capitalism was emerging in Britain, you had London and then you had Glasgow that was emerging to be a center of capitalism. And then you had the people in the Scottish Highlands that were still feudal and practicing feudalism. And as the Glasgow capitalist economy was expanding, they wanted to stop it. And they took up arms to try and put a Catholic king on the throne to defeat the Protestants. And it was called the Jacobite Uprising. They were not fighting for Scottish independence. They wanted a Catholic king. And they rallied around a French guy, Bonnie Prince Charlie, and they were defeated. Bonnie Prince Charlie fled to the Isle of Skye to get away. And after that, if you read what was done in the Scottish Highlands, it was the model for a lot of the genocides that later happened to native people and to other colonial projects, because the people in the Scottish Highlands, they didn't speak English, they spoke Gaelic, and they spoke other languages. And so they took kids away from their parents and beat the language out of them. And they forcibly cleared and removed people from the lands that they lived on for thousands of years. And the Scottish people were being murdered and genocided, basically. The reason that in Appalachia, you'll hear a lot of old Appalachian bluegrass songs, "Over the river to feed my sheep, over the river, Charlie." Well, it's because those were Scottish folks who fled because they'd been driven off their land when they were clearing the Scottish Highlands. What they did to the Native Americans a century later, what they did to other people, just destroying a people, wiping out a people, is what the Glasgow English capitalist economy was doing as they cleared the commons to create the market. And Adam Smith was living in Glasgow, and he was writing excessively about the civilizing influence of commerce. And he was talking about his own people. He was ashamed to be a Scotsman, and he saw his own people as a bunch of savages, and he was saying, we need commerce. Capitalism will civilize these people. They're backward. And that even though Bonnie Prince Charlie was not fighting for Scottish independence, he was still an icon that later, the Skyboat song was used by the Scottish independence movement. He became an icon that people rallied around. So you listen to the Skyboat song, you listen to it, it's a tragedy. It's like we've lost it, and it always ends with "Charlie will come again." The other song many of us knew from childhood, "My Bonnie lies over the ocean, my Bonnie lies over the sea, my Bonnie lies over the ocean, oh bring back my Bonnie to me." That's about Bonnie Prince Charlie. It's the Scots who are being exterminated and having their culture wiped out are saying, one day our king, our Bonnie Prince, is going to come back and save us, and we will get justice. And Bonnie Prince Charlie becomes this figure that's associated with Scottish nationalism. And really, it's a historical law. And this is what I've learned from Alexander Dugin and the philosophy of Eurasianism, is that there are empires of the sea and civilizations of the land. And empires of the sea are based on controlling trade routes and building up mighty militaries, mighty navies. But civilizations of the land have a little bit of a different relationship, because to connect land masses, you have to build roads. And so empires of the land are much more collective. in how they operate, and they're much less individualist, and they focus more on development. And even though we can talk about different economic systems, if you look at the empires that existed in Russia for thousands of years, the empires that existed in China, the dynasties, they have a different relationship with the peoples and areas they conquered than the Roman Empire or the British Empire or American imperialism today. That the Atlanticist model of controlling global trade, Charles Carey called the English system, right? Lenin called it imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, extracting value from all over the world to enrich mighty cities, versus the Eurasian model of great land masses, great civilizations and civilization states and empires on the land. They manifest themselves a little differently. And there's a law of history that you can look at, which is that when a civilization of the land and the people of the land are besieged, among them will emerge some kind of messianic figure, some kind of figure who becomes the expression of their desire to break free, the people of the land to fight back. That's what Bonnie Prince Charlie was, right? And that's what Stalin was, and that's what Mao Zedong was. And that the revolutions that have happened, let's be real, the 20th century, you can't understand it if you talk about communism versus capitalism. These were people of the land that had been kept impoverished fighting back and asserting their right to grow and have growth and not be part of the Atlanticist global system that was keeping them in poverty with its mighty militaries. And that's what's going on in the world today. The BRICS economy and the rising new economy in the East, that economy represents people of the land fighting back. Before I did this talk, I dug up some of the obituaries for my uncle who died in 1999, and I found out, and it made me smile, brought tears to my eyes. My uncle, before he died, he taught classes in Burkina Faso. Whoa. Burkina Faso, that's right. Where a person of the land, a land savior, one of these messianic figures, Ibrahim Traoré, is leading the people of the land to fight back and assert and build. That's how you can understand it. The African people have been besieged by colonialism in the empires of the sea, and so the people of the land are expressing themselves. And this is so much deeper than just Marxism. Read all the Marxism you want, but dig deeper. Tolstoy, when Russia was being invaded by the French, Tolstoy wrote in his great novel War and Peace, he wrote, "A people defending its land cannot be conquered by any army that has no roots in it. The invader depends on supply, order, and obedience. The defender depends on life itself. And life is stronger than any army." He said, the French soldiers stood on Russian soil as something alien, something hostile, something lifeless. The Russian stood upon it as his own body, people of the land. And therefore, every step forward weakened the invader and strengthened those who belonged to the land. The people of the land all over the world are fighting back. The book we distributed about the Houthis, one of the chapters is called People of the Land Fighting Back. Ansar Allah, these are people that have lived in the mountain for over 1,000 years, practiced their particular Zaydi Shia Islam, and they have guns. They love their Second Amendment. It's part of their religion that you must have a gun. And they are fighting back against Zionism and imperialism and blocking ships and stopping that sea-based global economy to stand with the Palestinians, the poorest people in the world. The poorest people in the world are stopping the world economy. People of the land fighting back. Houthis are heroes. And you know who else was one of these land saviors, one of these land messiahs? Was Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln represented the small farmers, the labor unions, the free soilers against the slaveocracy, which wanted to make money selling cotton to the British Empire, cheap cotton to the British Empire. And the British wanted to send their navy to break the blockade and send weapons to the South. And who sent their navy to New York City? The Russians. The Russians stopped the British from intervening. The people of the land stood up against the British Empire. And even back when Russia was being ruled by czars, there was still a connection between the people of the land against the British Empire. I believe we Americans have it within us to be people of the land. Economics is central to what we're talking about. You know, Marxism is a philosophy. I'm at the point where I say I don't agree with dialectical materialism. There are things about the Marxist philosophy that I don't accept. But Marx spent his entire life talking about the problem of overproduction, the value crisis. That never before in history have we had a situation where people are hungry not because there's a shortage of food, but because there's too much food. Where people are homeless because there are too many houses. And that's what Marx spent his career explaining. That as capitalism develops technology, the economy becomes less and less stable. And it's pretty important in the age of AI to understand this, that as technology advances, and it's easier and easier to produce products, when you have an irrational economy based on profits, the result is going to be more and more poverty. And that understanding of the economic crisis that we're in, rooted in the computer revolution and rooted in the natural instability of capitalism and rooted in the fact that we have an economy where profits are in command, the anarchy of production prevents human beings from fulfilling their full potential. The productive capacity and the creativity of human beings is no longer able to fit within the constraints of the irrationality of the market. And that the struggle that we're waging is a struggle to break out of the irrationality of the market and to enable human productivity to go to an even higher place. That's what we're struggling to do. We're struggling to liberate the economy from the irrationality of the anarchy of production in order to create vast abundance. And Marx himself said that the only way the higher stage of communism could ever be achieved was with vast abundance. When labor becomes life's prime want, when work is something people do because they feel like it, they don't have to, when the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, we're struggling to create abundance. And our enemies, the ruling elite of this Western world, they've determined that the only way they can stay at the top is degrowth, is destroying the productive forces. They are Malthusians. They think there are too many people in the world. They think there's too much stuff being produced, and that in order to save their system, they want to grind people into poverty and destroy, and that's what they're about. And that's the struggle, is the ruling class needs degrowth in order to keep their system intact, but humanity doesn't accept it. They don't accept it in China. They don't accept it on the African continent. They don't accept it across the world in South America. People are rising up. They don't want to be degrown. They want more than they already have. And the American people want more than they already have. And they're not going to be degrown. And we're going to build an anti-monopoly coalition against the big monopolies that want degrowth. And we're going to fight for a government that invests in people and builds a strong economy. And that's what it's about. And if you want to call that socialism or communism, if you want to call that whatever you want, that's what we're about. We need to liberate the productive forces, the means of production, from the irrationality of the market. And that brings me to good old Marco Rubio. Good old Marco Rubio. I don't know if Marco Rubio is watching this right now. I kind of doubt he's watching it, but it's possible some low-level person is watching this. And the reason is that two of us here have actually spoken with Russian President Putin. And I've had a face-to-face interview with Ibrahim Traoré, the Iranian president. And the work that we do is watched very, very, very closely around the world. Let's be real. I mean, our rally that we did yesterday with the Gaddafi thing is already being viewed all over the planet. And the work that we do has a very, very, very big impact. There were people that I knew who were from Mali that said that they saw the images of our Traoré rallies in chat groups that had nothing to do with us. It had a big impact what we do. We're being watched very, very closely. And I got to say, you know, Marco Rubio, if you persecute CPI, if you go after us, you're acting like a complete fool, because we're the only hope you've got. Because the only future America is going to have is with the rising new economy in the East. That's the only future that America is going to have, is with the rising new economy. There's no other future. And if you really love America, you're going to want an America that can trade with Russia and trade with China and trade with Cuba and trade with North Korea. No one's done more than CPI to stand with North Korea. Now they're running articles about how North Korea is booming. Marco Rubio needs us. If America is going to prosper, if America is going to exist in 50 years, it's going to have to be because of people like us. The only future America has is with the rising new economy, and we're the only ones who understand it. The people talking about worker cooperatives or whatever, woke-splaining or whatever, they're not going to get it. We get it. We've been there, we've seen it, and we don't want to destroy America. We want to save America. We want to save America from the nightmare of this system of profits in command, and we want the economy to be rationally organized. So Marco Rubio, don't be a fool. We're the best chance you ever got. If you love America, you should love the Center for Political Innovation. 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, we had a conference, and at that conference, I said that I can see the day when Air Force One is loading up and President Tulsi Gabbard is on the plane and there's CPI organizers flying to Pyongyang to establish diplomatic relations with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And Juche scholars are coming to America to tour the universities to teach the ideology of Kim Il-sung. And we are touring the universities of North Korea to talk about John Brown and the abolitionists, to talk about William Z. Foster, to talk about Gus Hall. I can see that day, and I envision it. I think about it, and I want you to keep envisioning it. We haven't given up on that. Are you going to be on that plane with me? Yeah. Are you going to be on that plane with me? Are you going to be on that plane with me? Who's going to be on the plane with me? We're going to do it. We're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it. Wallace Wattles, he's got another quote that I've read you all before, but you just can't remind people of this enough. The more you talk and think about hard times, the more you will be inclined to seek some mental narcotic to dull the keen edge of your suffering, and the longer that you will suffer. There's no surer way to keep the masses poor than to continually talk and write about their poverty. Talk about the good time coming, because the good time is coming. And the rapidity of its coming is in exact proportion to the number of people who think and talk about it. Instead of going about showing horrible pictures of the conditions of those who live in tenements, go about showing the beautiful pictures of the conditions of the people who will live in the coming city. If you can inspire one person to go work for the coming city, you have done more good than you can by sending 10 people out with salves and plasterers to relieve existing distress. Instead of crusading against child labor and bad factory conditions, tell working people what splendid conditions they will have when they wake up and begin to operate the industries for themselves. The masses are not in bondage to anything but ignorance and intellectual laziness, and they can have what they have when they begin to think. We're trying to get people to think. That's what we're doing. Yesterday, when we were out with our Ibrahim Traoré banner, there were people giving us the fist salute. And I think it was Mike and a couple other people, and Dan and others were talking about, well, you know, this is not a threat, right? It's a symbol of power. The folks know where that comes from. The fist salute comes from the Paris Commune of 1871, the first working class revolutionary movement, seizure of power, the Paris Commune. It was defeated. And the Paris Commune, what happened was France was at war with Prussia. And the Prussians invaded and they were winning the war, and the French government surrendered. And the people in Paris didn't want to be conquered by the Prussians. So they formed a working class government to fight against the Prussian invaders. And they called it the Paris Commune of 1871. And then the French, who had just surrendered, the French leaders were so terrified of that working class government, they teamed up with the Prussians to brutally crush the Paris Commune of 1871. And after the Paris Commune and the uprising, the communards, the leaders of the Paris Commune, were lined up and shot. And there were thousands of executions as they were executing the Paris communards. And as they lined up, one of them, we don't know who, had the idea that when they were being shot, they would do this with their fists. And why did they do this? So they would stand there and they would do this. And that's because of something called rigorous mortem. Because after they shot them and they were doing this, they would then throw their body into a shallow grave and throw dirt over them. And then their executioners would look on in horror as the fist came up out of the ground. And the fist was a symbol of immortality. It's a symbol that even in death, we have a legacy and we have an impact and we will not be defeated. That's what the fist is. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. So I just wanted to end with that. So thanks, everybody. Let's go have lunch.